Pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to talk about Anil's work. You may be aware that I've written the catalog essay, and I will try to say other things, not to repeat myself. For me, the two important aspects of Anil's work are abstraction and religion, both of which are quite obvious. And I'm going to speak about them from a Western point of view. I'm not going to deal with Indian religion or meditational aspects, of which he's written quite well. I do have to say, though, I was very moved by the personal dimension of these works as he spoke about it in relation to his family. So without further ado, I want to address first the issue of abstraction and why I think his work is important in abstraction. And let's do a little history, since I am an art historian. In 1952, Matisse said, "As for the so-called abstract painters of today, it seems to me that too many of them depart from a void." Okay, that there was nothing there. Now, we know Matisse and also Picasso explicitly believed that pure abstract art was impossible, okay? But his emphasis on the void is extremely interesting. Let's just recall what was going on in abstraction at the time. In 1950, Pollock had made the last of his so-called all-over paintings. Okay, he got into some difficulties with coming up with new ideas, but he returned to figuration of some sort. Well known, particularly in A Portrait and a Dream, in which he deals with a dream that he had and goes back to his surrealist roots, which are some of one of the sources of his arts. 1951, almost as an immediate response to Pollock's all-over painting, Barnett Newman paints Vir Heroicus Sublimis. When you go into the Museum of Modern Art and you go onto the floor in which these works are, it used to be, they've changed it now, you'd walk into the Pollock room, there are a large number of Pollocks, and you face number one, and you turn this way, and there was an entrance, and you face Vir Heroicus Sublimis. I was in the museum a few days ago. Number one has disappeared somewhere, but Vir Heroicus Sublimis is there. Vir Heroicus Sublimis was attacked when it first came out by Panofsky. He said, first of all, the Latin was wrong. Secondly, he didn't see any humanistic aspect of it, and he didn't see any virility in it. He didn't see humanus, and he didn't see anything significant in it, as he said. And of course, he responded with that. When Pollock's all-over paintings were first exhibited, they were attacked by a prominent Italian critic named Alieri. They were called chaotic, okay? They were said to be about nothing, okay? That is the word. So Matisse is responding to that, at least in part. At the same time, in 1949, Rothko began to make the shift to his broad all-over paintings. It's a crucial year, and this is what emerges, what Greenberg called post-painterly abstraction. Newman is a key example, but also he pointed to Rothko, who he thought was the weakest of the three, and the third was Clifford Still, whom he admired the most of all, in a very important essay called American-Type Painting, okay? Rothko, as you are probably aware, in a famous statement in 1943, which was published by Jewett in the New York Times as an explanation for the work, said it was, quote, transcendental. He wanted people to cry in front of his work, et cetera, okay? Then there's the Rothko Chapel, which, as you may know, works were originally destined for the Four Seasons restaurant, and somehow Mrs. de Menil brought them to the Rothko Chapel, and we have this rather dark, morbid space, supposedly a, quote, spiritual space. That's a quote from the way it's advertised, a place for meditation, chapel. That's become the standard gospel, but the point that I want to emphasize, if you look at these works, if you look at Newman's work, they're empty, they're voids, okay? Now, the idea of that abstraction had dwindled to a void, that it no longer had any content. It had lost what Kandinsky called the spiritual content, and I'm going to come back to this word spiritual later on, was very crucial, okay? There's a great deal of debate about it, but it's never been quite convincing to at least many connoisseurs in the area that the American-type painting was, quote, a new spiritual art, or that it had realized in a new way Kandinsky's idea of a spiritual art. In any case, there was a sense of nihilism involved in there. And this was very, very crucial. So the question became, how do you fill if you accept Matisse and various other thinkers' words, how do you fill this void, and what is the void about? Now, interestingly enough, George Steiner, an English intellectual and critic, wrote in England in an essay that what you saw in these works was the absence of God, interestingly enough, the disappearance of God, maybe the sort of a belated death of God. I guess God died, according to Nietzsche. That has various meanings, and then he sort of disappeared, according to Steiner. And he suggested, he hinted at the idea that maybe there was the deus absconditus in this. This was a rationalization. That is, the hidden God, the mysterious God, the unknown God, the God beyond gods, if you wish. I mean, this is a very complicated idea. What is important about this idea is that it's connected with the idea of the numinous, which Steiner doesn't talk about, and which Rudolf Otto, in a very famous book, 1924, at least it's famous in certain quarters, spoke about the numinous and the holy, the return of the holy, okay? So the idea of religion was hanging around the edges, shall we say, of abstraction, or the idea, as I would prefer to call it, of spirituality, and I like the German word, I want to use that right now, Geistigkeit, which has to do with the quality of your consciousness, okay, the quality of your consciousness, okay. So the idea was a kind of, if you want to use the conventional term, a kind of consciousness raising was going on, and that and somehow you got some kind of spiritual experience, so to say, looking, at least for certain quarters, looking at Rothko in the Rothko Chapel. I've been there a few times, and I don't know, it was not my idea of spiritual to be in a black abyss, but that's my problem. Anyway, there was this problem. Now, what I'm suggesting to you is the notion of religious art, broadly speaking, fell on very hard times in modernity for a variety of reasons. Maybe it was kept alive in Kandinsky in abstraction. Maybe it's there or not there in Rothko. You can play all kinds of tantalizing games. Maybe you can have a religious experience connected to an aesthetic experience. Maybe you can get a sense of the numinous, but it was not entirely convincing. Now, to make my point about how religion fell out of favor, even though art became a religion, as Jacques Barzun beautifully points out in his book, The Use and Abuse of Art, which were the Kress Lectures here in Washington many years ago. I want to give a quote from Hemingway, which I think conveys the whole point, and I want to join it up with something else. Hemingway, in his story called A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, has the following version of the Lord's Prayer, a very famous sacrilegious prayer. He says, "Our nada," nada means nothing, "our nada who art in nada, nada be thy name, thy kingdom nada, thy will be nada, as it is in nada. Give us this nada, our daily nada, and nada us our nada as we nada our nadas, and nada us not into nada, but deliver us from nada, pues nada." Okay, wow. These are integration of the two versions of the Lord's Prayer, one in Matthew 6:9-13, the other Luke 11:2, and in addition he adds the famous Gabriel's salutation to Maria, the Ave Maria, as well, okay? This is very important. This work this statement by Hemingway was very influential in I think a very important exhibition, at least to my mind, held at the, at least art historically important, I don't know how important the art was, but held in Philadelphia at the Institute of Contemporary Art associated with the University of Pennsylvania, okay? The exhibition was called The Big Nothing, okay? I think it states where a lot of art comes from, okay? The Big Nothing. It had many kinds of things in it. I'll give you the advertisement of one of them, Andy Warhol's film Sleep, which was advertised as a provocative exploration of the empty, okay? More pertinent to the Hemingway quote, there was an artist named Michael Lonier who exhibited what he called his nada graphs, nothing graphs, which were inspired by the Hemingway, okay? Hemingway also wrote a poem, which is not so well known. It's only 2 lines. It was written in 1927, And it goes as follows: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want him for long." Okay? So there's a sort of smart-ass Hemingway. Nihilistic is the point I want to get to. I've always thought it significant that Hemingway committed suicide, along with many other modern artists who have been documented as schizophrenic and disturbed, okay? Now you can say, why am I saying this, okay? Why am I going into the life history, which is well known? If you want to find a real discussion of it, you can see the Politics of Experience book, very famous book by an English social psychiatrist, okay? It's quite an extraordinary account. One could say, quote, they lost faith, okay, in whatever faith is. There's been a lot of discussion in various psychological quarters, so-called positive psychology, which you may have heard of. You can say Norman Vincent Peale's Power of Positive Thinking, whatever, but the importance of faith, hope, and charity, which are traditional religious virtues. Faith, hope, and charity. They have to do with attitudes to time, and so forth. Now, I think what you see in Anil's work is a revival, a serious revival of religious art, okay? I think what is, and I'm going to talk about that for a moment, and the way I think he revives it, which he may not agree with what I think. The very crucial aspect of them from an abstract art point of view and a religious point of view is the religious texts that are in a number of works. So it's an integration of image and text as image. Now, language, as you know, is abstract also, right? Language is abstract, so it works right well within his images. So the shapes of the letters, it's almost Kabbalistic, apart from whatever meaning they have. It has this kind of abstract cosmology kind of implication, okay? But the point is, it's the most densely textured abstract work I know in modernity, and there are other examples of abstract work. So I think this is a very important contribution on a purely perceptual, shall we say, perceptual, conceptual level. You can say his work, therefore, is a form of what has been called conceptual painting, if you want, okay, understanding this. Now, let's get to the rigorous part, because I'm taking too much time here, but here's my idea of what's going on. When I first saw the textual works from different religious sources, I immediately thought of Lessing's famous play, Wilhelm Gottfried Lessing's very famous play, arguing that there were three paths to God. This is an 18th century play, The Great Rationalist, and Lessing argued that the Christian, the Jewish, and the Muslim were all paths to God, okay? They still may be, but I don't think they take the same path as he thought they might. But anyway, the idea that art has religious or sacred implications is extremely important, and it's been pointed out that there is an extraordinary, at least in the Western tradition, I'm sure this is an Indian tradition as well, I know something about it, an extraordinary connection between art and religion, okay? There are two in Western tradition, broadly speaking, two main kinds of art, at least up until modernity: art that served religion, art that served the state, and sometimes they were both together, okay? So this has always been there. This collapsed in modernity. It partly, at least in the West, it partly collapsed because of the emphasis on the individual. Here I want to go somewhere else, but it's connected, and then I'll come back to Anil's work. I want to quote from, to my mind, one of the great sociologists of our time who passed away recently. That's Daniel Bell. And Daniel Bell you may know of for his famous book, The Cultural Contradictions of Capitalism, which has been a very prominent book for a long time. He also wrote a series of essays, and in one essay he wrote, it was called The Return of the Sacred ? The sacred coming back, okay? And his argument in this, and it's an intellectual, philosophical, as well as sociological argument, is that you can't have culture without some sense of the sacred, or as I would put it, some kinds of ideal, some kind of idealism. This art by Anil is an idealistic art. That is a novelty in our times, an idealistic art. And here's the quote from Bell, okay? He first, this is after he talks about what he calls the cult of unrestrained self-expression in modernity, or what he also calls the emphasis on self-expression, that is, on individual expression. And in his Cultural Contradictions of Capitalism, he points out the collapse of the Protestant ethic and the turn to hedonism. This is done extremely early when he wrote this. This is in the 60s, all right? And while he appreciated modernism, he felt already in the 60s it was becoming cliche-ridden, okay? We could debate that or not, etc. But he was interested in culture. Here's what he says. The modalities of culture are few, and they derive from the existential situations which confront all human beings through all times, in the nature of consciousness, how one meets death, the nature of the soul, the nature of tragedy and the character of heroism, the definition of loyalty and obligation, the redemption of the soul, the meaning of love and of sacrifice, the understanding of compassion, the tension between an animal and a human nature, the claims of instinct and restraint. Historically, therefore, culture has been fused with religion, okay? And religion has always dealt with those issues, whatever form, okay? Now, here I want to go back to my particular interpretation of Anil's work. I do not believe Anil's work is dealing with religion in the sense of a doctrine or a dogma. He may quote from this sacred text or that sacred text or the other. I think something else is going on. This is my opinion. I think he's part of an effort, and I know other artists who are involved in this, certain artists in New York that I know pretty well, that general consensus among these people is that, and it's a general modern issue, is how do you separate the idea of spirituality from dogmatic and doctrinal religion? So Alex Gray, who has this very famous sacred church, which you may have heard of, maybe not, is now moved out of New York City into Westchester, and very concerned with meditation and Buddhist, very famous for this. In any case, he points out, and we all know this already, and he's not the only one in this group of artists that I know, that you can get all the iconographic information about any religion you want in an encyclopedia. The Larousse Encyclopedia of Religion has it. You can get any iconography you want, you know. It's all there. That is, what is there are the external carriers of the spirituality, okay? And these are simply like brand names, okay? They're brand names. So what I see is going on in Revri's art and Anil's art, to put it very strangely, is that each of these texts cancels out each other. They cancel out each other, or they all fuse at the same time. And the point is to disinter the spiritual core that religious dogma, as articulated in these texts, okay, that is mediated by them is there. That is the conscious, what they're saying about consciousness and conscious effort, okay? Now, we have a sculpture here, which I've seen for the first time, although Anil sent me an image of it, and it's about peace, okay? He's concerned with war and peace, and the quote from Gandhi is extremely pertinent, the misuse of religion for justifying everything that's happening now in every culture. It's happening in the American political race, it's happening in the Arab countries. You know, whenever you kill somebody, you can say God's will, you know? God's been willing that for a long time. Anyway, you know, from the Crusades on. I mean, this is a brutal world we live in, and I frankly am a strong believer in Freud's idea of basic human destructiveness that has to be brought under control. But in any case, what I think Anil is saying, let's see what can be preserved from all these traditions. What's the spiritual core of them? And all of these works have a core-like kind of closeness tension. So this is what I think he's trying to do, is to make a spiritual art, if you wish, again, geistig Kunst, make a spiritual art, okay, that is free of dogmatic associations and religious doctrinal associations, whether it's Hindu or Christian or Muslim or all the religions he has there, which I can't keep up. I mean, there are religions invented every day, I think. I was told that in Washington you have a lot of them and they're all tax deferred, so good reason for your religion. We're talking about setting up a religion of art, not pay taxes on it. So my idea is that I think this is a very daring art. It's a very daring art. It deals with very core existential issues. It deals with them in a very concentrated, rather elegant way, okay, very elegant. The ambassador spoke about the precision. I want to go one step further from what the ambassador said. They are very refined works. They're very refined. And for me, as an art historian trying to keep up with what's going on out there, looking at art, what I see them, having seen the de Kooning show in New York, great admirer and all, this is the end, if you want, of the tradition of what Ruskin deplored as flinging a canvas, flinging paint at a canvas, okay? It's the end of the gestural tradition, the so-called savage gesture, okay? The harsh palette knife, okay? Over. So return to refinement, and if you look at the surfaces of these works, which are really quite exquisite, okay? They have a very peculiar affinity with what I know as traditional Western beautiful surface art. And refinement is an intimation of the ideal. It's the beginning of it. If you can refine things, you're moving towards the ideal, away from brutal, destructive reality. So I think the project of Anil is extremely important, okay? It has its affinities with certain other work of artists that I know of, different handlings, sometimes figurative, sometimes abstract. I'm not sure how much that matters anymore these days, frankly, but there are these differences art historically. So I think this is a, quote, shall we say, a kind of breakthrough art. I hate that word, but I think it also signals something else. It signals also that the shock of the new, you know, the so-called shock of the new is over. In New York, we have this sort of expression that's gone the rounds. It's called the shock of the new has become the schlock of the neo. I don't know if you know what that means. That's an expression that's gone the rounds, okay? So I think the shock of the new is over, and I think he's returning to something that's very important, which is spiritual art as inspiration, or art serving inspiration. And I remind you, inspiration connected with taking in breath and spirit, breath, spirit comes from that. So I think he's given us a major kind of, quote, what should we call it, new spiritual art, or reviving certain important ideals which have been lost in modernism. And whatever, quote, self-expression involved here is minimal, in my opinion. This is not a self-serving art, you know, swashbuckling strokes and all that kind of thing. And it's not a destructive art, okay, which is extremely important. Thank you.
I wish I had said that. You know, I
wish I could say that.
I told you I didn't want to follow Donald Kuspit. I told you. You should have asked Don Kimes. I saw him actually, AU professor and artist Don Kimes actually just about kept up with you on one panel discussion I saw. And it was, come on down. No, sorry. Let me just take a quite slightly different perspective. I've had the pleasure over the years to work with a lot of artists, really a wonderful pleasure of working with a lot of artists, many of whom are here. And every once in a while, you'll have an experience working with an artist where it really changes, you know, the way you look at art, you know, look at a lot of things. One of them was in 1977 at the Washington Project for the Arts, when I had the pleasure of showing Tom Green his exhibition, 12 Pictures. And that, there's a similar kind of clarity of vision, that, you know, clarity about something that really you can't understand intellectually. It's just, but yet there it is, so clear. So Tom, thank you very much for being here tonight. We've been working on the show together for almost 2 years, right? Yeah, about that, maybe more. It seems like 5 years, but
from previous birth.
And you know, I just, you know, as you go through the show, it's the result of, you know, such thoughtfulness on every level. I mean, it's one thing to be an artist and to make beautiful works, and then to be able to take that work and really take command of the way that it is going to be experienced, so that you have an environment in there really created by Anil, and it's a very, very special environment. You go through many transitions as you walk through, and it's very, very special. And the catalog as well is completely a product of Anil Revri's intellect and talent. And so I encourage you all to pay special attention to that. As I say, there's a clarity there that is just, you know, so rare.